Hi, everybody. It's Maria DeSimone from InsightfulAstrology.com. Welcome to my channel. I am doing this short video on Venus in the 12th house because I receive a lot of comments and questions about this placement, probably because I have this placement. So everybody wants to know what the deal is from an astrologer's perspective. So I get it. Now, listen. Venus is the planet of love. It is the planet of money, aesthetics. It's what you value. And the 12th house in astrology is absolutely an unfortunate house overall. In general, it can signify loss, suffering, sorrow. It is, it's spiritual. And if you channel the energy in a spiritual direction, that can mitigate things to some extent. In a compassionate way, it can mitigate things to some extent. But I want you guys to understand that just because you have a planet in the 12th house, it doesn't automatically mean that it's going to be a disaster in your life, that it's going to reflect in your life experiences as a lifetime of sorrow and troubles in the area of your life that that particular planet symbolizes. Now, that can be true. And how you determine that really depends on the individual birth chart and what that planet in your 12th house is doing with the rest of your chart. Is that planet making beautiful aspects in your chart? Or is that planet being maltreated by malefic planets? Is that planet in detriment? Is it really difficult? You have to judge each nativity by itself. To make a blanket statement that Venus in the 12th house automatically means a lifetime filled with sorrow and tragedy and horrific experiences connected to love and or finance is just sloppy astrology, right? That's right. I said it. That is just sloppy astrology. So if you have read that, if you have watched videos that say that, please understand that that is the most generic statement anyone can make about Venus in the 12th house. And it does not mean your Venus placement in the 12th house is doomed. Having said that, if you have Venus in the 12th house and that Venus happens to be in a difficult position and not well supported in your chart, then the reality is in your lifetime experience, you will probably experience more hardship, trials, sorrow, suffering connected to love and or money than the average person. But you cannot determine that unless you are able to truly look at your birth chart and understand what that Venus placement is doing. So if you are not qualified to do that, if you are a beginner in astrology, the biggest mistake you can make is thinking that your Venus placement is automatically doomed. Please hire a competent astrologer to help walk you through your particular Venus placement so that you understand this for yourself and that you understand how to work with your Venus placement and how to potentially mitigate some of the difficulties that are showing up in your 12th house Venus placement. And if you are somebody who would rather study astrology for him or herself, make sure that you are studying astrology with a qualified astrologer and astrology teacher and or astrology school so that you can learn how to do this for yourself. Now, what I'm going to do is show you 3 chart examples of Venus in the 12th house. 2 of them are a train wreck. 2 of them are very difficult and have had real difficult experiences with Venus ruled matters. But one of them is absolutely glorious. And the difference that I'm going to show you is how that particular Venus placement is connected to the rest of the birth chart. So Of course, if you want me to walk you through this, you can hire me as your astrologer. Go to insightfulastrology.com, schedule a consultation. We could talk about absolutely anything you want to in your birth chart and in predictive astrology. Or I welcome you to become a student of mine. You know, I do have an astrology school for over 15 years. You can go to my website and get on the waiting list for any of my classes or sign up for a current class if that is a class that you are ready to take. Now, let's get to it. I'm going to share my screen. And what I'm going to do is show you 3 different birth charts. One of them is my own, because like I said, the whole reason for this video is I am constantly getting questions, emails, comments about Venus in the 12th house, because I have Venus in the 12th house, and I have been very public about how difficult that has been for me in my life experience. So that's going to be one chart. Then I'm going to show you the birth chart of Mia Farrow. So you may know her as the woman who was married to the actor, the director, Woody Allen years ago. And she had a very difficult love life experience where her adopted daughter started to have an affair with her husband, Woody Allen. So she had an extreme, significant experience of sorrow and hardship in her love life. So I'm going to show you her birth chart. And then the final birth chart that I'm going to show you is a Venus in the 12th house example that is absolutely stunning. I mean, if you're going to have Venus in the 12th house, you want it to look like this. And this happens to be the birth chart of someone who is also a celebrity, who is also famous, but she happens to be a very close friend of mine, psychic medium Kim Russo. And so I not only have her birth chart, but I happen to intimately know about her love life experiences because we're close friends, and I know her husband, and I know her very, very long, happy marriage history. So I'm going to show you how her birth chart is so different from the other 2 examples. So this is going to be a fun video, and it is going to hopefully prove to you that if you have Venus in the 12th house, it doesn't automatically mean it's going to be a shit show in your love life or in your financial life. And if you do have Venus in the 12th house and it is difficultly aspected, then yes, there may be real experiences of sorrow and hardship that you are fated to have in this lifetime. But that doesn't mean you have to live a miserable life, because the 2 examples that I'm going to show you of myself and Mia Farrow, who may not have the most beautiful love life experiences, we are using our 12th house Venus in other productive ways to manifest a really positive life. All right, so let's get started. Let me share my screen and let's see whose birth chart shows up first. Okay, so it's actually my chart. So this is my birth chart, and you can immediately see that I have Venus in the 12th house. And the way that you judge a planet in any house is, first, you want to look at the condition of that planet, the sign that it's in, and then the aspects that it makes to the rest of your horoscope. So right off the bat, we see that Venus is in Aries in this chart. Venus in Aries is in its sign of detriment. It is not in a happy place. She is in her exile. She is in a sign that is opposite her sign of rulership, which means she is being forced to do Venus things in a way that is extremely uncomfortable for her nature. So Venus wants harmony. Venus wants beauty. Venus wants everything collaborative and sweet, nice, right? That's Venus. That's the nature of Venus. But Aries is a warrior. Aries is very independent. Aries is extremely self-driven. And that is not conducive for relationship dynamics in and of itself. Okay. So right off the bat, we have an X because Venus is in her sign of detriment. But you know what? We can't make a final judgment just from that. We have to look and see the aspects that Venus makes to determine what's going on here. And so we can see that in this chart, the most significant tight aspect is an opposition to Pluto. That is a difficult aspect of power struggles, of potential betrayal, dark, difficult situations in love. That's one aspect. There are a couple of other aspects. Venus is also making a tense square in this chart to Saturn. Saturn blocks and limits what it touches. And Saturn has the power to say no to something or to delay it. In this case, Saturn is saying no to relationship harmony, to commitment, to relationship happiness, long-term speaking, because Venus rules the seventh house. All right. Now, that is a difficult aspect, and it is a pretty tight aspect as well. There's more. In this chart, Venus is also making a square to Mars. And even though there is a mitigating factor in that there is something called reception here between Venus and Mars, and that is because Venus is in the sign ruled by Mars. So Venus actually answers to Mars. And even though they're in square, they have some type of affinity. Even though it's uncomfortable, there is an affinity here. And Mars is my chart ruler because I have Aries rising. So that is probably a reason why I even had a marriage opportunity, that along with the fact that my part of fortune is in my seventh house, which you can't see in this chart. But Venus is square Mars, and a square is a square. And ultimately, that square connects to more friction, more difficulty in relationship matters. Okay. Now, Venus does make a trine to the moon and Neptune, but because Venus also makes 3 difficult aspects in this chart, it is the final judgment of Venus. You have to be a mad scientist when you're an astrologer, okay? I am so adamant about this. You cannot approach astrology from the perspective of unicorns and rainbows and, oh, if I wish it and manifest and create a spell, I'm going to make the life I want. I'm sorry, I don't believe that. I just don't, okay? Too much in astrology is fated and predetermined, and that there is a comfort in that, but there is also an uncomfortable truth in that, because we all have to accept that in our life experiences, there are going to be some really great things and some really shitty things. And the way the cookie crumbles for all of us is going to be different. But if you can radically accept where your blessings are and where your hardships are, you can choose to focus your life on cultivating the blessings. And I am so adamant about that. Now, the final judgment of this particular nativity is that because Venus is in her sign of detriment, and because she is making 3 very difficult aspects in the horoscope, and 2 of them are aspects to malefic planets, it is not going to end well in relationship dynamics. And that has been my objective life experience for the past 49 years, okay? So even though I am sure I will always have relationship opportunities, I will always have another relationship potential, I am also sure that I will not have the amazing situation that my friend Kim has had, because that's not what my chart shows. So my first relationship ended in divorce. My second long-term relationship suddenly ended. I haven't been able to have a committed relationship since then. I do believe there's going to be another commitment in my future, but you know, this is dark, but I do feel that this last chance that I have at love will probably end in the person that I fall in love with passing away or some other kind of ending that is very difficult because that's just my destiny. Okay, that's just what my chart shows. Now, let's look at another example of a very difficult chart. This is the chart of Mia Farrow. And we have her exact birth data. So this is reliable birth information. And by the way, I am using the Placidus house system for these examples, but I'm probably going to mention something that makes you see that you can just as easily put this particular chart in the whole sign house system, and it's just as accurate. Okay. So, like myself, Mia Farrow has Venus in her sign of detriment in the 12th house. So Venus is in Aries in the 12th house, and everything I said about myself would apply to Mia Farrow as far as Venus in the 12th house significations go. But her Venus looks very different than mine because we're different people and we have different life paths. So her Venus is making, instead of an opposition to Pluto, it is making an opposition to Neptune. Okay. So we see the potential deception, disillusionment, disappointment in love right off the bat. Like me, her Venus is also square Saturn in Cancer. And that is also a pretty tight square. Both of these difficult links are pretty tight. Her Venus does make a trine to Pluto. So like me, she did have some support to Venus, but there's more difficulty than support. Okay, so her Venus also makes a sextile to Uranus, just to be complete here. It's a sextile to Uranus. However, you can see that her Venus also makes a square to the moon. And finally, Venus in her chart is also by sign making a square to Mars. Now, this becomes significant. In modern astrology, you would not look at this and consider it a square because the orb is way too wide. But if you use traditional Hellenistic techniques and you were to actually use the whole sign house system, first of all, that Mars placement would be moved to the 9th house. Venus would still stay in the 12th house. But in Hellenistic astrology, there is a concept called witnessing by sign. So you do not have to have an aspect by orb the way that you do in modern astrology. Sign to sign aspects are powerful enough. And in addition to that, Mars in this case is making what's known as a superior square to Venus, which means Mars is overcoming Venus. And that is a very significant condition of maltreatment. Mars is the traditional ruler of her marriage sector. So the final judgment for Mia Farrow, very similar to myself, is that even though she has a couple of nice aspects to her Venus, she's got the sextile to Uranus, the trine to Pluto, it is not enough to mitigate the difficulty that is showing up here of having Venus in her sign of detriment and making a square to Mars, the ruler of the 7th. So in both of the cases, myself and Mia Farrow, the ruler of the 1st house is square the ruler of the 7th. That is difficult. In addition, Venus is opposite Neptune. Venus is square Saturn. You cannot escape the difficulty of this, okay? So she's got these sweet little sextiles here. She's even got one to Mercury, but it's not enough. And her reality, her life experiences have been tragic across the board in her love life. You could read her autobiography for more information on her love life history, but the most famous disaster was the unfortunate situation of her adopted child having an affair with her husband and then later marrying him. That is pretty difficult for anybody to deal with. So now, before I get to my great Venus example, I want to make you understand where the potential blessing is for these two examples with Venus in the 12th house who have had disastrous romantic experiences. So first of all, I'm not going to talk about the financial stuff because even though Venus rules finance, in both cases, there are other situations that show positive energy for finances. So just because you have Venus in the 12th house doesn't mean you have to be doomed in both areas. There are so many facets of the horoscope. But even though Venus is in the 12th house and both of those examples are showing difficult situations in the love life, in commitment, both charts are actually also showing a life experience where the person has dedicated herself to service, to healing the suffering of other people in some way. Mia Farrow is known for adopting a lot of children. She is known for being an extraordinary activist for the rights of children. She even went on a hunger strike. I mean, she's done some amazing things. Look up her autobiography if you're interested in learning more. Very, very proactive with helping to heal the suffering of others and defending the defenseless people. And in my case, I am using my Venus in the 12th house to be a spiritual entrepreneur and to do as much as I can to help and heal others by teaching them about their astrology and how to use it. So both of us are doing positive 12th house things, which are very spiritual. And while that will not erase the suffering that we're destined to experience in our love life, it kind of makes it a pill that is a little bit more easy to swallow. Because if we weren't doing those things, we both probably would be suffering in horrendous ways. Even though we have suffered in our love life experiences, we have also picked ourselves up and taken ourselves out of our personal pain and used it as a catalyst to help and heal the suffering of others. Right? And that's the thing. If you do have a Venus in the 12th house that is completely debilitated, like myself, like Mia Farrow, you have to do that for yourself. You owe it to yourself. That is your soul's path. That is why you have this Venus placement in the first place. And it doesn't make it pretty, but it makes it tolerable in this lifetime. All right. So now, maybe you're watching this video and you have Venus in the 12th house, but you don't realize you actually have an amazing Venus in your chart. And just because you have Venus in the 12th house, it doesn't mean you're doomed to a total shit show in your love life experience. Well, my good friend Kim Russo, who is a psychic medium, has that exact experience. So I'm going to show you her chart right now. And if this doesn't prove to you that you cannot look at every Venus in the 12th house or any 12th house planet, cookie cutter the same, I don't know what will. All right, so Kim has Venus in the 12th house, just like the other two examples. Her Venus is in Cancer, and I might add, her Venus is retrograde. So her Venus is in Cancer, which is neither here nor there in terms of dignity or debility, but it is retrograde, which can be potentially a difficult situation. And it's in the 12th house, which can be potentially a difficult situation. But let's look at what Venus is doing in her birth chart before we make a final judgment. And we can see immediately Venus is making almost an exact sextile to Uranus. And that Mia Farrow had that also. Also is making a sextile to Pluto. All right, lovely. So far, so good. Venus is also making a beautiful trine to Saturn and the moon. But here is where it gets interesting. The moon is Kim's chart ruler because she has Cancer rising. And Saturn is the ruler of her marriage sector because Capricorn is on the descendant. So the ruler of her first and the ruler of her seventh are conjunct one another and trine that Venus in the 12th house. This is gold. You can look at this chart and you will not find Venus making one difficult aspect. There are no squares, there are no oppositions. Venus is pretty damn happy, even though she's retrograde. And by sign, okay, so going back to traditional astrology, by sign, even if we're not going to use the orbs, Venus is sextile Jupiter. And, technically all of the Taurus planets. But let's focus on Jupiter in particular, because what is happening here is that Jupiter is making a superior sextile to Venus, which means Jupiter is overcoming Venus. The two benefics are as happy as they could possibly be. And Jupiter is her the benefic of the sect in favor for her if you're using Hellenistic techniques. And so Jupiter is very much bonifying Venus. Now, it is true that if you go to the whole sign house system, her Venus moves into the first house. But you know what? My Venus moves into the first house also. If you look at my chart in the whole sign house system, and either way, the degree of these Venuses are cadent, meaning they are towards the 12th house in either chart. So I have absolutely found that if your Venus placement is before your ascendant degree, it tends to act more in 12th house matters than if it's after your ascendant, okay, and you're using the whole sign house system. So her Venus placement is as beautiful as can be. And in this chart example, the ruler of her first and seventh are conjunct and then trine Venus. And she has been happily married to a wonderful man who I know personally for, I may be getting it wrong, but I want to say 35 years or almost 35 years they've been together. Amazing. That is not a Venus in the 12th house story that you would think has come to pass. But this chart indisputably proves to you that you cannot judge any Venus in the 12th house placement or any planet in your 12th house just by the fact that it's in your 12th house. Okay. Again, it's sloppy astrology. Don't believe the hype. Become a competent astrology student or an astrologer yourself so that you can see how every birth chart is individual and every birth chart has different fated, destined circumstances connected to their 12th house placements or any other placement in the birth chart. But again, this was a video about Venus in the 12th house and whether or not it is going to be a disaster in your life in terms of love and or finance. And I focused on the love stuff because that is really what everybody wants to know. So I hope you found this video helpful. If you did, make sure you click that like button. Let me know in the comments what your 12th house Venus is doing in your birth chart and how your actual love life experiences have been reflected by that Venus placement so far in your life. I would love to hear it. All right, guys, take care. See you soon.